Okay, so once again, thank you all for joining me as we're talking about career readiness and we're talking about the ways that it can impact our teaching and create more inclusive environments for our students by preparing them and focusing on these skills for them as they move forward and are successful in our classes, hopefully, but also successful in the wider world outside of our class. So once again, my name is Lindsay Vreeland. Y'all can call me Lindsay, and my pronouns are she, her, and I'm an inclusive teaching coordinator for CITL at NIU. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about what skills employers value in their employees and are especially looking for in new employees. We're going to talk about incorporating career readiness skills into the courses that we already teach or into for those of us that maybe are working with co-teachers, units that we focus on, assignments that we focus on, how can we incorporate these skills? We're going to talk about particular activities that we can use to enhance students' career readiness skills or think about the activities that we're doing in a different way and think about what skills they're focused on in addition to demonstrating did you learn the content. And then we're also going to share strategies, for supplying information on these skills to our students. Let me turn my little camera off so we can focus on the PowerPoint and not my face. Okay, so when we are talking about career readiness, we want to make sure that we are being transparent. And it's through that transparency that we are creating these opportunities for equity and for inclusivity. So as I mentioned earlier, I come from the world primarily of first year composition and working with first and second year students. And there's a lot of assumptions that we have about what our students are able to do, what skills they're coming with equipped when they come into our classrooms. And so if we are acknowledging that we don't know what our students are able to do, if we're acknowledging that there are things that they should be working on, but we're going to actively be working on them with the students and enhancing the things that the students are coming with, but also maybe teaching new things, that's how we're creating a more equitable and inclusive environment. We're not saying, figure it out on your own. We're saying, this is important. Let's go through this together. Let's meet you where you are and bring you up to the level that you need to be. And again, these skills are useful for our own classes, but then, they will continue to work on them and grow from there for their careers, hopefully. And one of the big things is this is going to be working against gatekeeping in your field or in higher education. We hear so much about students that are first generation or are from other marginalized groups that their understanding of higher education, their understanding of what they need to be and to do it at the university level is so different from legacy students. And we want to make sure that we are acknowledging that and we're creating an environment where we're including students who just might not have an awareness about the college system or about working in the particular field that you're in, and making sure that they have the understanding that they need in order to, again, not just be successful in your class, because obviously we want our students to pass the class, if not do really, really well. But we want to make sure that they are comfortable in that field and in that environment when they move past our class and go on into the future. So today we're going to be talking about some pretty basic career readiness skills and hopefully things that we're doing again already in our classes. So we're going to be talking about communication, which breaks down into written communication and verbal communication. We're going to be talking about collaboration and cooperation, our critical thinking skills, project management, adaptability, and digital literacy. So skills that, again, make for great students, but also with the environments that we're working in, with the expectations of the job field today, we're expecting students to have a lot of these skills, regardless of whether they're going to be working at a Starbucks, whether they're going to be teaching, whether they're going to be a mechanical engineer, if they're going to be an artist. They need to be able to communicate with others. They need to make sure that they can finish tasks in a timely manner, that they can adjust when something's not working correctly, and think about it in a way that helps them solve problems. So what I'm not going to be talking about today is professionalism. Professionalism is really so dependent on the field that you're going into. And I wish I could say that professionalism is across the board, but what's an expectation in one space is not necessarily in another. I'm not going to be talking about punctuality, making sure students get to class on time and how to make them be afraid of not being in spaces on time. Again, this sort of all flows into field specific skills. If we were going to talk about what students needed to do in order to be in the nursing field, then I would have a specific workshop for that, which is not a terrible idea. But if you want to talk more one-on-one about skills that would be particularly useful for your field, we can have that conversation after this. And I'm not going to be talking about interview skills either. Career services for NIU has a lot of suggestions and has a lot of support with like interview skills, and talks a lot about professionalism and can help your students directly, but you could also partner with them if you wanted to bring in a resource for your students. So that sort of those conversations about professionalism and interviewing, those would come from probably career services. And I will help you reach out to them if that's, again, something that you're looking for. So I want to talk about communication first. So obviously, maybe not obviously, because we do have a world where we can be more and more isolated, but be successful and do our jobs and make good money. But communication is really, really important for life in general, but also for our careers. So things that we can think about with our students in order to encourage them to work on their communication in ways that are comfortable, but maybe they still will show a little bit of resistance to, is things like in class groups, we can have low stakes communication by having them pair off and talk about readings, or thinking about case studies, or even practicing skills that we're talking about in class. Students, no, let me back up. People really don't like group work. And I think it's really, really interesting. I have particularly worked with a lot of adult learners, and they are so suspicious of one another when they work in groups. They're afraid of people stealing their ideas. They're afraid of people stealing their work. They're afraid of people sabotaging them. there's just so much suspicion and fear, and it comes from somewhere. So I'm not trying to write it off as people are being silly about it at all. Um, but it's become very, very clear that we need to work more with other people in ways that feel low stakes, in ways that feel comfortable, in order to build those relationships, especially if we're going to be doing group work that actually is worth points and is an important part of the class. Can we build those relationships early on? Because in the work field, you have to, generally speaking, work with other people. We shouldn't be afraid of people looking at a report that we wrote because we think that they're going to steal it. We have to be able to collaborate and to cooperate. So group work, or at least group discussions in class, is a great way to start doing that. You can also have one-on-one or group conferences with your students, so they can practice communicating with you, or you can make it feel a little bit more possibly comfortable and less formal by having group conferences. They can ask questions about their work. You can ask them questions about their work. You can talk about progress, build connections, just ask them about their lives, and work on building those relationships and demonstrating to them that there are ways to connect with other people that are warm and friendly and professional, in that they're not too dependent on knowing details about people's lives or intrusive things. But you can still build those relationships, and you can still work together in a way that feels comfortable to your students and to you. And you can also work on sending emails. So I think this hits on something that that was mentioned a little bit earlier before we started the recording. Thinking about writing emails, what does written communication look like? And are they able to do that? So you might be giving them templates or having them for an assignment, or even for extra credit, practice writing an email. What does that look like? How does that sound? What are the expectations? Do they need a subject line? Things like that. And I think that we expect people to know how to do things because, especially young people, millennials, and most of millennials and younger, grew up and had email available to them for, most of their childhood, if not all of their childhood. Grew up and had computers around them, had to type papers to submit them, didn't have to do necessarily handwriting, that sort of thing. So we expect them to understand how the technology works, what the formatting looks like, what the genre of writing looks like. And unless they've been formally taught, all of these things they would have to intuitively understand. And that's just not really how learning works, and most of the time. Unless it's something that they were like really interested in learning, they probably didn't give a lot of thought to. So if we can practice written communication, if we can practice those emails, if we can demonstrate to them, like, what does that look like? Why are we doing it that way? That can be very helpful. And then we can also do some general writing things. I recognize that depending on what field you're in, writing assignments are not always going to be practical, but there are ways to incorporate writing in low stakes ways into your classes. So you can have them writing reflections, brainstorming things. You can have extra credit assignments where they're writing, or even they could be submitting progress reports. Maybe they're working on a final for their dance class. And so their project is going to be something that is physical and isn't something that they necessarily need to be taking an exam or writing an essay about, but they could still write a progress report. They could still uh, do something and hand something into you that is physical, that has them practice writing and communicating their ideas. And you can give them feedback on that. You can clarify if something isn't clear. And they're still sort of thinking about the process. They're trying to communicate. We're reaching a point of making sure whether or not we can understand each other. Collaboration and cooperation. I mentioned this just a second ago, but we usually don't work alone. And again, students just are so suspicious of each other and are so against group work. So we want to make sure that if we're doing group work, and well, we should be doing some sort of group work, and maybe again, it's just discussing things with each other. Maybe it's not turning in anything for a grade. Um, but we can use group work for reviewing materials that we read, for revising our work or redoing things. Um, we can build it in that you can revise and resubmit um, your essay, but you have to work collaboratively with your group in order to focus on that. And especially uh, that would reinforce this idea that we're learning from mistakes. That's another thing in higher education that we're not going to really touch on today, but um, there is such a resistance to making mistakes. You lose points, you feel silly, you feel like maybe you don't belong in a space if you make mistakes. But that's part of the learning process. So if we can get students comfortable with making mistakes and comfortable with working with others in order to improve what they've been doing in order to learn more, those are great ways for us to have students helping each other, but also working on the communication and cooperative work. We can also do assignments where they're taking notes collaboratively. So it might be if you don't have a huge class, it might be everybody in the class are sharing notes. But maybe you would also have like groups of 5 where they would have a shared document where they can be taking notes on different things. They can be focusing on different aspects of the readings or class or whatever that looks like. And I was sending out resources that demonstrate how that can be done. So if that's something that you're interested in looking into more, just know that after this presentation, you'll have resources to help you with that, if that's something that you want to think about how it relates to your class. And this sort of collaborative note-taking opportunity also gives students an opportunity to think about questions that they might have about the course or about the readings and feel empowered to ask them, but also seek answers with their classmates before they come to you. Excuse me. If you are going to be doing projects with students together, you could also have them develop group contracts. So they can be working together to establish expectations for what they're going to be doing. And it can help them keep track of the project. It can help them understand what they are expecting from one another. And it helps then too, if there is a dispute down the line with grading, we understand what's going on. There's already a contract that they have created with one another and that you have ideally signed off on. And we know what's going to be happening here on out. Critical thinking, depending on what field we're in, if we can incorporate case studies, or we can come up with activities that are going to be problem solving, so our students are actually applying what they're learning, whether it is like concepts or skills, that's great. We're going to work against them memorizing information and work towards them applying information and practicing those skills. So if they are solving problems, they could be writing about what they believe to be true, a hypothesis, but also if they're going to start a research project for a class that I'm teaching, and they're going to be thinking about, I don't know, laws governing queer and trans people in the United States, they could be writing a little thing before they start researching. What do they believe to be true? What are they expecting to find? What do they understand about the topic already? What are they seeking? Maybe they identify key terms and things that they're going to be looking up. So they're thinking about the process of researching or of conducting an experiment, or of attempting to write a play or whatever it is. They're thinking about it before they start doing it, and they're making that process clear. So it's not just let's show up the day of and see what happens. It's planning and thinking critically about what they're expected to do beforehand. And then you can also ask them questions to deepen thinking, excuse me. So obviously, I think we're all familiar with this idea that we want to stay away from yes and no questions when we're talking to students about particular topics. So if you can ask them to tell you more about something, what they notice, why does that matter? How can they connect what they're talking about to resources? That's all very helpful. And some of the things that I have talked about previously, they're going to bleed together in ways because if you're working on one skill, you're also generally working on multiple. If you have an activity or an approach that is going to be good for one skill, it's probably going to be good for other skills too. So talking about project management, when we're thinking about project management, we might want to think about group work and having students break down aspects of the work that they're going to be doing together. Students could individually propose a report on the project that they're going to be doing. So what's their plan and what's their checklist for completing that? They could be doing that with groups. And project management, if we're thinking about how do we teach that skill or reinforce that skill depending on what students are going to be doing. Again, if we have students that are from engineering, if we can have them do a project, if we can have them break down the task and come up with some sort of report, that's pretty useful versus taking an exam. But logistically, that might not just work, depending on how big your class is, depending on what the workload is like. So while some of these ideas are useful, I also want to recognize that the logistics don't necessarily work for every class. If you've got a class of 200 students, it might not be the best approach to have every student email you and practice emailing. That's a lot of students from just one class. If you're teaching 4 and they all have at least 100 students, that's a lot of emails, right? So logistics might impact how we're doing these things, but there are still ways for you to encourage students to work on these skills or to have them do it, whether it's in group or whether you're looking at something informally. Maybe they're submitting something on Blackboard to demonstrate that they're working on this project, but it's not graded. There are still ways for us to sort of check in with our students in those ways. We also want to make sure that our work is scaffolded for our students when they're working on projects, and they could also demonstrate their scaffolding. So if they know that they're going to be writing a research paper, they could break that up into chunks and they could demonstrate to you how that project is going to work. Ideally, you are going to be scaffolding your class so that you're also covering the information and the skills necessary along the way. But they can also think about that scaffolding and what works well for them, what resources they might need, or assistance they might need along the way. I do want to recognize that we have tools available for us for free at NIU, but there are also other tools online that students can use for free or for low cost, that depending on what works for their classes or for their brains might be worth it. So especially when we're thinking about project management and we're thinking about maybe like organizing our workloads into making sure that we are checking off boxes along the way, it can be really useful for you to tell your students what do you use individually, figure out what other people are using in the field, in the department, on the floor that your office is. What are other people using in order to stay organized or in order to make sure that you are hitting all the marks that you need to? You can demonstrate to students how to create checklists, how to scaffold things, but then you can also share information about things like office tasks, which is a to-do list where you can set up due dates and check things off, and it clicks and there's a little ding and it's very satisfying. Students don't necessarily know how to use online calendars, which again, I think that we sometimes assume people know how to do things, but they've never been actively taught how to do them. So showing them where the Outlook calendar exists and how they might put in reminders and have that show up is useful. And things like Goblin Tools, which is an app specifically meant for neurodivergent people. You can put in it's free, but you can put in tasks that you are wanting to achieve, and it's going to break that down into bite-sized pieces for you. You get to acknowledge when you've done little things, and it is very satisfying for those of us that like the feeling of checking something off the to-do list. But sometimes we have students and we have ourselves in moments where we're feeling so overwhelmed. We have 50 things to do and we don't know where to start. And I have a research paper and I don't even know what I need to do first. And so if we can show students how to break those things down, if we can give them tools that they can stay organized and create like many deadlines for themselves, if not to just remind them of the deadlines that we have created for them. These are all like very useful tools that they can take along with them, like the skills once they have been introduced and reinforced. But again, they might not have been actively taught how to create a task list or how to fill out an online calendar, and what that looks like. It's also very useful for our students to be adaptable. And this is something that, some of these skills are things that we are also continuing to learn and work on ourselves. Adaptability is going to be my my white whale. I'm going to be constantly trying to searching for it and working towards it, and it's always going to be on the horizon for me. But slowly but surely, I am moving towards it, and it's such a useful skill for many of us. Some of us have jobs where things will change last minute for reasons that are unpredictable. Some of us have to have a plan A through D, especially if we're going to be working with people that are going to be teaching. We need to know how to pivot because technology isn't working. We need to know how to pivot because uh, there is something going on and half of our students are gone for the day. We need to know how to adapt to circumstances that are presented to us without just throwing in the towel. And one of those ways that we can do that is, again, by learning from mistakes, normalizing mistakes, recognizing that not everything's going to be perfect all the time. And if we're building opportunities for students to recover from mistakes by redoing assignments or acknowledging the things that they did incorrectly and giving them opportunities to correct those things, that can be very, very useful. It can also reinforce that asking for help is a great skill and that there are resources and tools available to help them as they go along. Working with others is a great way for them to work on becoming adaptable because there are more variables when you're working with other people than when you are working by yourself. So that will help them become familiar with responsibilities and tasks that aren't necessarily completely in their control. And sometimes that's a great thing because one student needs more support one day than another. And so having that group to fall back on is great. Other times, some of our students might need a little bit more support from other members in their group that aren't showing up in the same way. And we can see, okay, how are we going to achieve the things that we need to achieve based off of what's happening? And self-directive learning is another way to encourage our students to become more adaptable. For those of us that are teaching honors classes, or are teaching capstone classes or are working towards a larger final project, especially if the class is virtual or asynchronous, it's very useful to make sure that these students that are in these classes are going to be adaptable. So they're going to need to identify the resources and support that they need and pace as they need it. And that doesn't mean that they're completely out on their own, but that means that they're sort of working according to their schedule and their instincts, working towards a deadline that's the same for everybody. And this is generally going to be upper level students. So again, for my first year writing classes, they're not going to be doing a lot of self-directed learning. But if we are working on maybe end of the year, or excuse me, end of the semester projects for our, I don't know, Psych 300 class, maybe those end of the semester projects are going to be a little bit more self-directive with our students choosing how to approach those things, what the mini deadlines are, what that looks like, and having to adapt based off of not having class because of XYZ things, being out sick. What does that look like? How can they manage their workload, and how can they also be responsible for the things that they need to be responsible for? As I mentioned earlier, digital literacy is such a huge thing that we we take for granted that students know how to work in digital spaces, that they understand what reliable resources look like, that they know how to use tools and where to find information. And we really can't assume that about anyone. If we have students that have only ever been using the Google Suite in high school and they're coming in, they might not be familiar with how to use Word. They might not be familiar with how to use the Outlook calendar. Maybe they're familiar with, Google Docs and Google Calendar, and it's not necessarily like night and day between those uh, different programs, but we can't assume that they know exactly what we're asking them to do in the programs that exist that, we're asking them to use. So we want to make sure that we are talking about reliable resources, that we're talking about things like authority and bias, what that looks like. Even if they are at the beginning of the class talking about something, let's say related to the election, because that's, happening. If they're talking about something to do with a particular politician, and we're not sure if that's a true thing or not, we can demonstrate to them how to fact check that information, where they might find reliable news. If they're going to be bringing things in for research projects, obviously we want to be talking about fact checking information and thinking about our resources, but these skills apply to our everyday lives too. So it's not unuseful to take 5 minutes and show how you might fact check information online. We want to make sure that we are talking about online resources and AI tools. So if you don't want them to use AI, I totally understand, but we can also talk about why they shouldn't be using them and the limitations of those tools. So a lot of people will have, ChatGPT write a paper about Romeo and Juliet and then have students look at it and say, like, how do we feel about this paper? Not telling them that it is AI generated, having them grade it, having them make corrections. And then students in the end up recognizing the ways that AI is imperfect. And it gives them a familiarity with the tool and why it wouldn't be useful in this particular way. To tell somebody that they can't use it altogether, they shouldn't be using it ever at all, I don't think that's realistic. But showing them how they might use it in order to check grammar instead of generate an entire research paper is, I think, a good use of time and energy. But we also might want to show them how to use these tools like citation generators, which have been around for a very long time. And students always use them in my writing classes, but I show them also where the Purdue OWL is, how to find information, how to check those citations that were generated by AI in order to make sure that they're actually including all the information and not just relying on this tool that doesn't know what their project is, doesn't know what's going on, and isn't actively like thinking critically. When we are having our students work in online spaces, we also want to make sure that they understand what those spaces look like, what the expectations are. So we can have them share or work collaboratively and share documents. And another thing, again, we can point out the tools that we're using in order to make our work in digital spaces easier, better, more effective. So how are we using the Microsoft 365 programs? how do they use Adobe Creative Campus? How do they use Grammarly? I heard from a lot of people that are against things like Grammarly, like this idea that we need to make sure that students know how to check their own grammar. And I 100% think that knowing conventions and rules and language is very, very useful. I also don't think it's realistic to say to students that they can't use a spell checker. And if they can install Grammarly on their computer or on their phone so that it's going to spell check the emails that they're sending or the text messages that they're sending, or help them with these other online spaces, I think that that's pretty useful to get them into the habit of thinking about what they're putting out into the world, and at the very least, if not, actively rereading and editing, then they can at least use this tool to help that process go a little bit more smoothly, and help with them when they are sending out important things either to you or to the world beyond. So, one of the last things that I wanted to hit on is talking about uh, how we're going to practice or share these career readiness skills. And so I've given a lot of examples of how um, we can bring these skills into things like especially group work, or um, but that's not going to work perfectly for everybody, and there are going to be things that you just don't have time to get to in class, or that you can't rely on group work for. So something really simple that you can do is creating a resource library, especially if you're going to be telling them like, oh yeah, use Goblin Tools app in order to help you stay organized and manage projects, or uh, you should be using um, office tasks in order to keep track of your to-do list. So if you have a resource library, you can have information about those tools in it, and have links so that they know where the um, the guides for using those tools exist, or where to go to download that thing. What page does that thing live on? We also want to make sure that we're modeling these skills. So you can fact check yourself. You can show them where you would find information. Um, you can, again, also show them how you use your personal calendar, or things that you use to organize yourself, or to work with other people. You can give them examples. So if you're asking them to do something like scaffold a project or create a plan for project management, what does that actually look like? We're not just sending them on their way and expecting them to understand intuitively what that sort of management plan looks like, but giving them an example, if not multiple examples of what that might look like, is helpful. For emails, if you can give them a template, if you can show them what the expectations are for the information that's supposed to be included, we can do that for other things too. It's not uncommon for writing to give students a template for, how something is supposed to be set up according to MLA conventions, or Chicago style, or whatever that looks like. And so we can still give them templates for other things, even if we're not thinking of just about formal writing. We can also ask the guests to come in. So if you know people, we can invite people in, but we can also find YouTube videos or podcast interviews for people that are from the field, and see what insight they have. And again, there's career readiness services on campus, excuse me, and we can invite those friends in to talk with our students too about what the expectations are for the field that we're in, what skills they need to be working on, what they need to be thinking about as they're moving towards the end of their career as students, and are thinking more and more about their career. Okay, so I've been talking a lot. So I would like to give you an opportunity to ask questions if you have any questions, but also share out because I'm sure you're doing cool things in your classes or you've watched other people do cool things. So I'm curious if there are um, some ways that you've been teaching career readiness skills or that you've seen other people teach them um, that you'd like to share. And if you're talking actively with your students about skills that they're practicing or they're learning. And because again, if we're telling students you have to do group work, uh, there might be some resistance if we're talking about, well, we're doing group work because it's really important that we can work collaboratively with other people in the field, or that we know how to communicate with other people and solve problems or whatever. Uh, that um, that information hits a little bit differently if we are being transparent and we are putting a particular type of spin on it. But yeah, what do you all have to, do you have anything to ask or do you have anything that you would like to share?
I'd just like to share that this has been really helpful. I really focus a lot in the classroom about teaching my student teachers how to work with the younger kids, um, and really those classroom strategies. So talking explicitly about some of these time management strategies and these professional strategies has been really helpful. And I think one of the best one is just modeling and being really clear about the expectations and sharing examples that work for me and getting them to share examples with each other.
For sure. That makes a lot of sense. And some of these skills we might not be great at ourselves either, right? If you're trying to do time management in your teaching and time gets away with you from you consistently, just acknowledging that and being like, you know what, I'm going to use a timer instead. Like this works better for me, and this is what we're going to be doing, and this might be helpful for you as you start to enter this career. And maybe by year 5, you'll have an understanding of what 30 minutes looks like pretty, down pat in your brain. But right now, this is an okay tool to use. Yeah, thanks for sharing, Catherine.
Just wanted to kind of further follow up on the resistance to group work because um, I do put my students in groups, and I think for those that participate, it does feel like a valuable experience. But I do have a solid chunk that it's not even that they're being resistant, it's just that they completely like opt out of it. And so they will very intentionally not talk to the people around them. They will find something else to do to distract them. And then no matter how much I prompt, it doesn't feel like they really snap out of it. So if you have any further strategies for dealing with that, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, no, that's hard. And that happens, and that's like normal. But it is very hard, especially if you're like, this is what's best for you. I know what I'm doing. And having people be resistant to that. I think that so I'm gonna send out resources. So you can check some things over at your leisure about group work and how to encourage engagement. Um, But again, if you aren't already sort of being transparent about like, hey, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. If you're doing that and that isn't working either, there are some things that might be, maybe you want to do something more hands-on. Maybe there's something that you want to do that encourages them to not have phones or computers out. And so the distractions are limited in that way. But it takes more planning. If you want to have them work with Play-Doh and come up with some sort of model of the brain, that's going to take some planning. You have to find some resources, but it can also help them really engage with information differently and feel like opting in more. However, I will say that sometimes students just won't opt in. And that's just going to happen. Sometimes you have students that show up and will actively not move out of the corner of the room, won't do anything with other people, don't want to talk, are physically present so that you can mark them as being present, but aren't going to want to engage. And you can only do so much with that, which is very frustrating. Like obviously you can have conversations outside of class and check in with people, but yeah, what I'm thinking off the top of my head, and again, I'll send out some resources, is that maybe something that is more like actually hands-on might be useful. Again, not knowing what you're actively doing in the class, and maybe you're already playing with Play-Doh, which I would love for you and would love for everybody. But there might be something that would be forcing students to use different parts of their body and their brains and be more excited about engaging with what you're asking them to do, even if they don't really want to work with other people. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, of course. I was just going to say that we're running out of time and I want to make sure that you all, I respect your time and that you get to where you need to be at 3, even if it's just out of this virtual room. So I just want to share some final thoughts and say that you can enhance what you're already doing. We don't have to like reinvent the wheel. We don't have to figure out the best way to do group work this very second. If we can tweak the group work that's happening, amazing. But also maybe we think about that next semester and what that might look like and starting fresh. Again, transparency is really, really useful, and thinking about sharing with students exactly what you're expecting from them and why you're asking them to do those things, whether it's a career readiness skill or not, super useful. And resist grading what you're not teaching. I don't recommend grading things like professionalism and punctuality and whatnot. Might be useful for the field that you are working in. That's an individual thing that you have to figure out. But if you are asking them to do project management, but you're not telling them to, or showing them how to do that, but you're giving them a grade for that, that's a little bit tricky. So if you can break down those skills and actually spend some time on showing them how that works, giving them resources, modeling, examples, whatever that might look like, and then giving some sort of grade for it, whether it's 10 points out of 1,000 or 10% of their final grade, whatever that looks like, if we can make sure that we're not grading them for something that we're expecting them to do, but we're not giving them necessarily all the tools they need in order to be successful at that. I highly recommend that. Okay. Thank you all so much for joining me. We are at 3. We're at 3:01. So I want to make sure that you all get a chance to go and do what you need to do. But thanks so much for joining me today. If you have questions, concerns, anything, feel free to email me, or we can talk after this. But thanks so much, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.